Time to reflect on Spurs' win over Marseille last night, clinching that top spot in Champions League Group D. Delighted to say Martin Lipton, the chief sports reporter with The Sun, is on the line with us this morning. Morning, Martin. How are things?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, very good.
You're happy enough? I mean, the first half was fairly poor from a Spurs perspective, but the reality is it's a results-based business, and you got the job done.
Yeah, I mean, they won. They didn't play well. Have we seen that once or twice this season? Yes, we have. It's been a story of the campaign thus far. Really, they're still to play, I would say, 80% of what they're capable, let alone 100%, and yet they are grinding out results. And yesterday was a case in point. Awful first half. It was only when they conceded a goal that they decided to try and score. And then second half, once they got back on terms, a little bit shaky at times. Kolasinac is a great chance, but Tottenham had the better opportunities.
I guess when you consider, like, at half-time, you felt Spurs were going to have to do a lot, and the table at half-time read Sporting first, Marseille second, Spurs in third, and Frankfurt in fourth. Hard to believe then that those bottom two teams ended up being the two that progressed to the last 16. But I mean, was it the switch to 3-5-2 that kind of changed things up for Spurs and got them into the game a little bit more? Because when Heung-min Son went off, you're thinking, this is made a tough task even tougher, because you've Richarlison out, you've Kulusevski out. So the fact that they managed to do it in those circumstances is quite even more impressive, Martin.
Well, I think the key was they actually played 20 yards higher up the pitch.
Right, yeah.
They were just sitting off and letting Marseille play in front of them, which is always a dangerous game, particularly when you've got Tottenham's defence. And lo and behold, they switched off for a goal from a corner, which they were still moaning about the corner, and justifiably so, but that's what happens in football. You've got to take decisions and react to them. Second half, they were pressing the ball properly, they were playing higher up the pitch. The extra body in midfield allowed that, but they were setting traps for Marseille, which they weren't in the first half, and they were winning the ball back in positions where they could hurt them.
It was interesting you brought off Sessegnon at half time, because Sessegnon had been involved obviously in the corner, and I don't know, he could have been one of I guess 5 or 6 candidates, Martin, at half time. They were that insipid.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't play well, but none of them did first half, did they? Let's be brutally honest about it. They were lucky to still be in the game. It could have been all over. They could have been 2 or 3 down, because they were very, very poor. Sessegnon started at right back, was switched to left back, didn't seem to know where he was. Sometimes you just need to do a bit of shock therapy, don't you, in a team, to change things up, and that's what happened. And it definitely improved the way they play. For all the stick that Emerson gets, it's mainly about his delivery. It's not about his defending in terms of 1 against 1. I think he always falls asleep at the back post, as we saw on Saturday at Bournemouth, and again last night for Kolasinac. But he actually gives the squad the team a bit more definition, because he does know the position.
The issue there of Spurs going behind again, Martin, and we spoke about this yesterday with Gareth Roberts talking about Liverpool as well, and it's an issue they've been facing all season. But and you saw it with Tottenham at the weekend against Bournemouth as well. I mean, look, they're third in the table in the Premier League. They've topped their Champions League group, so all is well in that regard. But this trend of going behind in games and taking that concession to wake themselves up isn't a sign of champions, and it's something they're going to have to address.
It isn't, but I think it's 5 on the spin now. They've conceded the first goal in all competitions. That's too many. The last time they didn't was Everton at home. So you're right. It is becoming something of an issue. They've managed to keep on digging themselves out of it a lot of the time. The last 3 matches, draw against Sporting when they should have won the match. They were much better second half. Bournemouth, when the last 20 minutes they turned it round, and again last night. You can't keep on walking on a high wire. You're going to fall off, aren't you? I mean, it's as simple as that. It's impossible to consistently pull off escape acts. So I think there is a recognition. The other thing is, it's pretty clear that Conte's basically told them to play with the handbrake on this half of the season. He wants to get through to the World Cup without too much damage. Well, if they can pick up 4 points, 2 points even from the next 2 league games, then that would have been achieved. They'll be in the top 4 or 5, within touching distance of where they want to be. They are in Europe, still in the Champions League. That will be job done as far as Conte is concerned.
You think? I mean, I've heard that before. You think that actually is the case? It does look like that might be the case when you look at the way they're playing, and it is very, very constrained, particularly in the first half, and they're kind of trying to do enough, and they're in a good position in the league.
Yeah, I mean, whether it was accident or design, it appears to be the way they play. I mean, it's interesting listening to the players yesterday. They were admitting that they were playing too deep and standing off. And you do wonder, well, why? Why did you do that?
Like the second half, Martin, it was literally like it was like as if, okay, let's act shit in the first half and let's act like we can play in the second half. It was so different. It was like, this can't be by accident.
You would think not. There has to be something in it. It's about, sometimes it's a sort of rope-a-dope tactic, isn't it? You let them punch themselves out and then strike. And we've seen teams do that in the past. But you tend to do that if you've got a solid defence. And a team that's conceded 16 goals in the Premier League so far has not got a solid defence by its very nature when they've only played 12 matches. So it's hard to see the justification for the faith in that regard in them defensively. But Conte knows a lot more than I do, and a lot better than I do. I think he genuinely is trying to get through this first half of the season. I think there will be significant reinforcement in January as well. They need 2 or 3 better players in various positions, and I think that will be critical to determine where they finish. Last season's January signings were critical. In Kulusevski, who's much missed at the moment, and Bentancur, they were the big reason for them coming in the top 4. Also, Son is still not playing as well as he can, and obviously he got injured yesterday. I think we'll find that he wasn't concussed, even though he was concussed, because if he was concussed, he couldn't play on Sunday, so therefore he wasn't concussed, even though he was concussed, if that makes some sort of sense, because that's what happens in football. There's a lot more to come. There's no doubt about that, but there needs to be as well.
Some of the positive performers then last night, Martin. I mean, you look at Clement Longley, one of the unlikely scorers, I guess, last night when you looked at it from the outset, but and maybe it's because he's a Frenchman and wanted to perform against Marseille in the Velodrome, but he played really, really well, and even not just in terms of the goal, but the interceptions he had at the back as well. Someone like Pierre-Emile Højbjerg was brilliant. And you look at Denmark's World Cup and you're thinking, if he can play like that, I mean, they could do anything in the World Cup. So some very good standout performers, especially in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, Højbjerg's been Tottenham's best player this season, without a doubt for me. He's been the most consistent, the most impressive. He's added goals to his game, which he didn't really have. He had 1 or 2 a season before, and he's got more than that already. That was a belting finish last night. It was actually harder than the one he hit the bar with, I think. But he keeps on making those runs and keeps on trying. I think that's really important. Longley is finding his feet. He's been there 3 months now. One of the reasons they brought him in was his experience, and also because he was available. He wasn't first choice, second choice, or third choice for that role of left-sided centre-half, but he was available. They've got him in on loan. I would be surprised still if they turn it into a permanent deal, but you never know. If he keeps on performing, then that may change. But yeah, the pair of them played well. I think, Lloris made the saves he had to make last night. Even his distribution was typically Llorisian, shall we say. Dyer had a wobbly period, but when it mattered, he came strong. Bentancur drove them forward second half. Kane was basically a one-man attack and was occupying defenders, and when it really mattered, his run led to the winning goal.
You got to have sympathy for Conte and other managers as well, Martin, haven't you? Because they're throwing this like almost inhumane schedule where, and if Spurs collapse in the second half of the season, we'll all be like calling for his head. Where, he's I'm sure Jurgen Klopp seemed to be compelled to play a very good team last night purely because they needed a win, which is completely counterintuitive for players that probably need a break. And I wouldn't want to be a manager, put it that way.
It is difficult. They're all having to balance things they've never had to balance before. And it does make things tricky. And I think you can look across Europe. A lot of teams are not performing to the highest level. Also, we've got the situation, I think, for the next 2 weekends, a lot of players will be wary about getting injured. They won't want to, so they won't be completely committed because they want to play in the World Cup. And I think all of these factors are completely unusual and alien. It's hard enough in a regular season with the amount of games, but compressing the Champions League into an 8-week period, which has been done this season, as opposed to the 12 weeks it's normally played over. Then we've had in this country, the extra chaos that's been caused by the aftermath of the Queen's death. So no one quite knows when matches were being played, and all these sort of things have added to the chaos. And you've got this World Cup and a 6-week break. And how do you look after players? A, the ones who aren't going to the World Cup, and B, the ones who are going to the World Cup, because unlike the rest of Europe, which waits until January and sometimes quite deep into January before restarting. In England, we're kicking off again. Well, there's League Cup matches on the Tuesday after the World Cup final and a Premier League fixture list on Boxing Day. I mean, you could argue that it's utterly bizarre and bonkers, but that's the nature of the beast.
It is, yeah. And you hear about Conte's training sessions. It must be really difficult for him. How do you go into pre-season and get this right and talk to your experts and S&C guys? And I mean, how do you plan for this? Is there even a precedent for the madness that this entails?
No, it's completely unprecedented. No one will know how to deal with it properly until they've been through it, and then they'll hope to never have to deal with it again. Although I start to suspect that 2030 may prove that you can have 2 Winter World Cups inside a decade. We will see. But you're right, and it's for every manager. It's particularly those with the vast number of players who are going to go to Qatar for the World Cup. They have even trickier tasks than the ones further down the league who've maybe got 2 or 3, a handful of players going. But everyone's got to sort out how they work it out. Do they do a full second pre-season? Do they give them 2 weeks off and then a gentle week and then a week of hard training? It's not clear. No one really knows what the answer is. And you'll only be able to say for certain when you've gone through it. At least you'll know then what works and what doesn't work, because it is a step into the unknown for everybody.
You mentioned Hugo Lloris there a minute ago, Martin, and I think last night he got a tasty reception from the Marseille fans. It was his first time back since he was there with Lyon 10 years ago. And I mean, he's been under fire for some criticism recently. I know the first goal they conceded against Newcastle, for example, a couple of mistakes against Arsenal for Gabriel Jesus. So he certainly had his fair share of criticism. Played quite well last night, but has he answered questions over the criticism he's got since the start of the season? I know Fraser Forster's waiting in the wings, but I mean, there are still probably some questions among Spurs fans as to Hugo Lloris and his form.
Yeah, look, I think that Lloris is still a pretty good shot stopper. Always has been. Likewise, distribution has never been his strong point. You wouldn't want him working in a parcel office, would you? Because you'd never get anything delivered. But he does make a lot of big saves. And the great thing about all good goalkeepers, particularly those of experience, is they don't worry about making mistakes. They think mistakes are an occupational hazard and they don't dwell on them, whereas younger goalkeepers tend to. Now, I think you could say that Lloris has made a few, but stats-wise, that his stats in terms of expected goals against and goals you can see, they stack up pretty highly still. He is capable of making big saves, and he's a big character within the dressing room. The other players like him a lot. And whilst the fans may not be completely convinced and may wonder if it's time after it's a decade now, that maybe it's time to think about replacing him, that isn't the biggest concern at Tottenham by a long way. There's others who I'd get in and change first before I think about Lloris. I think he may have one more season at Tottenham. I thought he might have gone a year or two ago, actually, but now he's here again. I think he might do one more year. If they could get someone in who's sort of 27, 28, right experience to do the next 10 years, then maybe you think about it. But you don't change for the sake of changing. And I mean, Forster's gone there knowing he's second choice. He doesn't think he's first choice. He's not going to try and, his first match will now, I think, be next week against Forest in the League Cup, and we're into the middle of November by then.
You mentioned that there are other areas of the pitch that maybe they could start looking at improving first. Are there any standout players that they've been either linked with or that have maybe impressed you during the Champions League group stages or otherwise that you think, right, there's a shoe-in for Tottenham? Yeah,
look, I mean, I think the real interest is whether he does pursue Maddison. Because I think the one thing you look at Tottenham and anyone can say they lack is a real creative midfielder, someone who can thread the needle, and someone who can take free kicks as well. Because whilst they're scoring a lot of goals from set pieces, direct free kicks haven't been a threat for quite a long time. Actually, Kane must be unbelievable in training because he takes them always, and they never come close to the net in the match. But there you go. I think they also they could do with and they got 3 right wing backs on the books, and he obviously has doubts about all of them for different reasons. And I still think they could do with a powerful centre half. They've looked at Bastoni and others, and none of them have actually happened yet. Let's just see where it goes.
Huge game on Sunday for Tottenham, Martin, and for Liverpool. I mean, it's taken on quite a bit of significance, this match as well now. 4:30 on Sunday, live commentary here and Off the Ball as well. But I mean, when you look at the table, Spurs, so 5 points off Arsenal's lead with a game more played. Liverpool back in ninth. I mean, both teams need a win. I don't know who needs to win more, potentially Liverpool, but I mean, it's going to be a cracker.
Look, if Spurs win, it would be a huge game because it's the first big match they've won this season. Liverpool, if Liverpool lose, they're 13 points behind Tottenham. More importantly, they're so far behind Arsenal, they might as well give up. Do the Liverpool players, how motivated are they for the rest of the season if they're playing for fourth? Because that's what they will be doing if they lose. So I think it's a bigger game in many respects for Liverpool because they can't afford to. They need to win. Spurs would want to win. Liverpool need to win because if Liverpool lose, their season has been, in terms of winning something domestic in the Premier League, is gone because they're not going to get that back. So it's huge. But Tottenham haven't played well against the big teams. They played them all away, which I think is a factor. If you look so far, only 2 games amongst the big 6 have not been won by the home team, and they both involved Chelsea at home to Spurs and United. All the other games have been won by the home side, and Spurs have gone away to Chelsea, Arsenal and United, but in all 3 games they were awful. So they need to put in a performance as well.
Yeah, we watched that game with interest on Sunday. Martin, great stuff as always. Thanks a million this morning.
Take care. Bye-bye.